All right, welcome to it. Iraq and ISIS are on everyone's minds. They're not going anywhere. So let's get into it with GOP Senator and presidential candidate Rand Paul. Welcome, Senator.
Hey, Kennedy. Thanks for having me.
Hey, I had your wife on last week. She's absolutely lovely. So please send her my regards. Adore her book, and she was quite kind. ISIS, not kind. ISIS completely sucks. And the president doesn't seem to have a strategy. He's getting criticized from all sides for not having a comprehensive plan, although it seems we are a year into the fight that we've known about, although he's known about it for longer than that. When you are president, what do you do about ISIS, especially in Iraq?
Well, I think you have to do a lot of things. First, you have to understand the mistakes of the past in order to not make them again. One of the mistakes of the past is for 10 years we've been supplying arms and training to a sectarian government in Baghdad. This is almost entirely Shiite. They've booted out and kicked out most of the Sunnis. They've angered most of the Sunnis in the country. And so really you have a Shiite garrison in Mosul unable to keep that city because the city's almost entirely Sunni. So you have to get rid of having one government in Baghdad that's entirely sectarian. But that's a 10-year-long problem. We haven't made it any better because we kept supporting Maliki all these years when he really wasn't able to develop a real national government or a national army. Second, I think if you're going to arm people over there, you shouldn't arm those who are feckless and don't fight well and who let their arms basically be directly captured by ISIS.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I think the president should cut out the middleman, and instead of sending weapons to Iraqi fighters right now that we're training with no clear good result in sight, he should just be sending them to ISIS because that's essentially where they are going, unfortunately.
Well, the other thing I would say, though, is I would probably go ahead and arm the Kurds directly. The Kurds will fight. And I would also promise the Kurds a homeland. If they're willing to fight, I'd say this is your land, it's yours when the war's done. This is your homeland and your nation.
All right. I mean, you have some lofty goals for Iraq and what it's going to take to stabilize, a very tribalistic part of the world. Can you do that? Can you accomplish that without boots on the ground?
Well, I think there has to be boots on the ground, but they need to be Arab boots on the ground. You'll find no lasting peace or no long-lived peace that doesn't include that the people who live there want to win as much or more than anyone else. If there's not the will to win by the people who actually live there, there is no possible victory and there is no possible peace that will come out of this. So you need to engage the people who live there. The Turks need to be involved. The Kurds need to be involved. The Iraqis need to have a more national government, national movement. The Sunni chieftains need to be involved. And ultimately, a government in Syria could be involved, but I think it would have to ultimately be a government minus Assad. So there are a lot of things that have to happen, and it's not simple or somebody would have fixed it already. But I think ultimately it requires a coalition of civilized Islamic countries that will stamp out this barbaric form of Islam. But it can't be done just by American troops. And I think even more and more Republican leaders are admitting that putting 100,000 troops back in there isn't the answer.
No, it's not the answer. And of your Republican fellow presidential candidates, who has the worst plan for tackling the Middle East right now?
Well, there's a lot of competition for that. I'd probably rather stick with the best plan, which is mine. No American boots back over there. Maybe a small amount that have to be there to protect the embassies and our consulate and to make sure that we are adequately defending American interests. But as far as the active fighting and overturning, it really needs to be the boots on the ground, need to be Arab boots on the ground. I differ from most of the other Republican candidates. Most of them would put significant numbers of troops back in there. The biggest mistake in the Middle East, if you want to look at one consistent mistake, has been toppling secular dictators, leads to chaos and to the rise of radical Islam. So we need to look before we leap, and we need to first do no harm, because a lot of what's happened in the Middle East has actually made us less safe.
Well, and you have a very convincing position. I actually share your position on foreign policy, especially in the Middle East, but you don't have a lot of Republican support. You've got a lot of people on the far right, especially the neocons, the hawks, who are attacking you for this position. But I want to talk about a coalition that you have created that is very unique in politics, especially today. On security and privacy, you've been able to unite progressives, libertarians, and constitutional conservatives. It is an odd collection of political bedfellows. How do you extend the coalition beyond the NSA and privacy?
Well, actually, I think there's a lot of people out there that aren't perfectly represented by the old moss-covered GOP. I think the new GOP does have a foundation outside of the Beltway. Even on foreign policy, if you poll the issue, should we be more involved in the Middle East or less involved? Less involved polls 40, 45%, maybe 50% in most of the early primaries.
Yeah, and let's talk about the NSA a little bit because, you know, you had another chance to galvanize your Tea Party base and libertarians, certainly who were influenced by your father and who were very intrigued by the limited government message that you have. What did you accomplish other than a political win with the fight over the Patriot Act and the passage of the Freedom Act that you did not vote for?
Well, actually, I think a significant accomplishment was a rebuke to the president, to say to the president, it is illegal to collect our records. It's illegal to collect them and store them in Utah. The court has told you so, and now Congress has told you so. So I was with part of the bill that eliminated the bulk collection. I just didn't want to send bulk collection over to the phone companies. So I still believe the Fourth Amendment says that records can only be collected with individualized suspicion. Interestingly, that's a very unpopular position in Washington. I may well be the most unpopular person in Washington right now. But if you get outside the Beltway, it's very popular. I'm finding as I travel in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, crowds are coming by the hundreds, and they all want to be left alone. They're part of this new GOP coalition I call the Leave Me Alone coalition, and I think it's growing rapidly. A lot of young people are part of this coalition, but frankly, you can come from all walks of life. I tell people you can be a minority because you're an evangelical Christian, because you're black, because you're gay. You can be a minority for any number of reasons, and you want the government to leave you alone.
All right, now, as you look at the Democratic landscape, and you know it's coalescing very strangely right now, do you worry about Bernie Sanders or Martin O'Malley? Do you know, because it seems like you have been targeting Hillary Clinton from midterm election night?
Well, the thing is I think there are a lot of independent voters in New Hampshire and Iowa, and they're allowed to vote in either primary. I think it looks like a runaway on the Democrat side. And so I think at this point, it looks like a lot of independents may have the choice to come and vote for me. Right now, we lead Hillary Clinton in 5 states that were won by President Obama. I think that's big news. And I think that a lot of that's because independents are coming our way.
I agree. I think, you know, in states where you have open primaries, that could certainly be beneficial for you. Here, I'm holding your book in front of my face. It's Rand Paul taking a stand. One of the things you wrote in here was about being a physician and your training in linear thinking. And I'm wondering what is more influential in your day-to-day work in Congress? Is it that linear training, or was it as a young teenager working on your dad's campaigns and in Washington and learning liberty firsthand?
Well, I think a little bit of both. People always ask about nature versus nurture. I think I was probably born as an individualist who believes in the individual versus the collective, but I also am somebody who grew up in the writings of the great free market writers. But I also am a medical doctor, and so I was taught to think about problems in an objective fashion. And so I can't separate myself from years and years of medical training, but I think that I look at things and I don't say Democrat or Republican, because I really frankly don't care what party you're in. I want to figure out how we solve problems, but also how we maximize freedom. And I think both work together very nicely from the viewpoint of a physician.
All right, from Grover Norquist to Politico, even Chris Matthews, some massive praise heaped on you on the back of the book that people can grab and read and peruse. Thank you so much, Senator Paul.
Thanks, Kennedy.
Indeed.